Come on. Look at how awesome that is. But if you see that in another repair shop and I'm not there, make sure you let me know. What is going on, riders? Cody from Motorcycle MD, and today we will be talking about chain drive systems for your Honda motorcycle. We'll be going over how to adjust, what to look for, and what not to do when it comes to your chain and your sprockets on your motorcycle. Now, as usual, this information could be spread out thin over a lot of different makes and models for the chain drive systems. I'll be doing a double-sided swing arm or the standard swing arm where you have adjustments on both sides, okay? It's the same thing that you would use for dirt bikes, same thing that you would use for whatever else is like this style of setup. They're pretty much all the same. How you adjust them may be different, and how you read the adjustment may be different. I will not be touching on single-sided swing arm chain styles because I don't have a bike right now with that style system. There's the train. Anyways, I have some awesome information for you guys to hear on what to do, what not to do. So let's get right into it. Now, for this video, I will be using a CBR F4i, and there's a couple things that you should know before you even begin. Now, in this video, I'll be using a rear tire lifter made by PITBULL. It's an awesome product. This is how I always do my chain adjustments, with the bike off of the ground so I can spin it and find certain things out about the chain. If you plan on doing this, be safe, guys. Alright, I've never had to do one on the ground without a jack or some kind of lifting system. So if you have like a Shadow or a 750, some kind of chain drive system, it's important to realize how you're going to lift that rear wheel up if you decide to make your own adjustment. But you can learn just as much knowledge just by learning about how it wears and what not to do. I also think it's super important to make sure that you do have some kind of torque wrench when you are tightening the rear axle back up. It's a key component to making sure that your bike is safe and that you don't die. And as usual, many bikes are different. Chain slack on some bikes is more than others. On dirt bikes, they have a lot more free play travel in that rear swing arm, which makes the need for more slack in the chain. So on some bikes, you could have 1.5 inches or more of free play. On other bikes, it's a little bit tighter. So before you begin, it's important to know that kind of information. What kind of slack in the chain does Honda recommend for your bike? For this one, they range between 25 to 35 millimeters of free play. Let's check it out. I don't know if you guys use gloves or not, but I use them all the time. Flip the glove inside out. Give it a flip-de-doo. Boom. All the fingers come out. That part's free. That part's free, okay? So, as you can see, this chain is very loose. And I did that on purpose. Okay, I just put a rear tire on it, and nice, good old rubber. I left the chain super loose so I could show you guys exactly what's going on. So, many times on Hondas, they show you what the chain slack is for your bike somewhere around the chain. This says 1 to 1/4 of an inch. Manual says 25 to 35 millimeters. It also says 1 inch to 1 1/8 inch in the manual as well. So it can be a little bit deceiving, but somewhere in that margin is totally good. You don't want over 50 millimeters of free play for this bike specifically. And correction, it's actually an 05 F4i. I'm an idiot. Many times you'll see chain adjusters when you have this style swing arm. 2 sides, 1 side, 2 side. The chain adjuster will look kind of like this. So this is where the new section of the chain would be when you just first install it. This is like your grace period is what I call it. This is when you get the most grace. And then once you pass this line, they're saying that you need to replace it. And there's always typically an indentation on the swing arm. Okay? Sometimes they look different. Like for dirt bikes, they may look like this. Or for other bikes, they may look like this. But for this bike, it looks like this. So I have the free play all the way slammed forward as far as it will go. Okay? So giving me an excessive amount of play. Now, what I want you to take from this is one very misunderstood topic, which is chain stretch. Chains do not stretch. Okay? They don't stretch. They don't stretch, they don't stretch, they don't stretch. So, what is actually happening is the chain is wearing. Okay, that would be a more politically correct term. O-ring chain, the O-rings sit between here. Standard chains, there are no O-rings. Very obvious. But when a chain is wearing, you have these rivet points, okay? rivet, 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 and you have these rollers right in between. So what happens is when you have a pin, okay, sitting inside of a roller, what do you think happens? As the chain gets used and used and used and used, you develop this gapping in between the rollers, the links, and the actual hardened steel, which is this pin. Okay, so as this happens and the chain rocks back over link and link and link and link and link, the chain will grow or stretch or wear. Okay, so it's not the chain metal stretching, it's just wearing more and more. Okay, so saying that, there's something else that I want you guys to be aware of. So when you're checking your sprockets out, okay, so on this sprocket we can see that the teeth look really well. It actually looks like a brand new system. The sprockets are barely even worn out. The front sprocket's the same way. In order to look at that, you'd have to, of course, take the cover off to pop a view inside of there. But let's pull up this sprocket here. Okay, this is off of a CB400A. And as you can see, this gapping is very wide. It's almost like it's starting to hook. Okay, and it's very, very sharp on the edges. These tips are starting to wear into almost like shark teeth. And this is worn out. So, let's say you see this issue. Let's say you see something a lot worse, which I have. I'll try to put some pictures up for you. But the main thing that I want you guys to take from this is that when you're doing your chain stuff, if you're actually going to go in and replace the chain or replace the sprockets, it's always a good rule of thumb to do all of them at once. All right, because what happens is, let's say you're all out of your adjustment. You're as far as you can go out on your slack. Okay, and it's still got a bunch of free play in it. When you go to put a new chain on here, that new chain's not worn to the sprocket because the chains and sprocket wear together. So if I put a brand new chain on, you're either going to wear the sprocket out even faster than it was before, or that brand new chain will then have an issue because the sizing of the sprocket has changed. All right, so where the rollers contact the sprocket is either going to be up a lot higher on the sprocket or a lot lower. It really just all depends on how it wore, kind of like this. So let's say that this is our roller. On a brand new chain, it may sit up even higher on the teeth and not down in this little pocket where it should be, or it will be kind of back towards here. So as you gun the bike and the chain keeps rocking and hitting back on these teeth, whichever way the chain is going, obviously, you're going to wear it out faster, okay? The goal is to get that sweet spot of minimal wear with long life. I know these days it's all about trying to save some money, but when it comes to this kind of thing, I mean, you really can't argue with the safety of your bike when it comes to your chain and sprocket, as well as the longevity of how long you want it to last. If you spend a bunch of money on a nice chain and then put it on worn out sprockets, then you might as well take that money and throw it in the trash can. So just keep that in mind. So that's a bunch of information. So I'm sorry about that. I went on a rant. So we're just going to dive right in and adjust this chain how I would do it, as well as along the way I'm going to try to give you guys some good tips and pointers to not make this too boring. So the very first step obviously is to realize that you need a chain adjustment. Next thing you want to do is you want to start back at the axle, because you got to be able to make this tire move back and forth, okay, by means of the adjusters. So in order for the tire to move back and forth, the axle has to be loose. I actually already loosened the axle on this bike so I can move along. So for these adjusters, all I need is a 8mm socket, okay? Let's say this is where the chain was at. Where I'm going to look at here is right on these notches. Let's see if I can get this shot. Now hopefully this is not being glared out, but on this actual metal armature, there's little notches on the top of it, as well as that one notch that's on the swing arm itself. Okay, so what I'm looking at are these notches up top of here, as well as that one that is machined into the swing arm. So this notch is right behind, let's say that first notch is number 1. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's how I look at it, okay? So that first notch is right in front of the line. So we'll say it's 1+. So it's right behind number 1. Let's go on this side and look at the same thing. This one is almost at the 2.5 mark. So what I'm going to do is, because 2.5 is further out, obviously your bike should not look like this. I loosened this up to try to show you guys. It should be even. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this out to the 2.5 mark. and do the same thing on this side. Okay, so let's say this is your setup right now. You got 2.5, 2.5 on both sides, and you have a somewhat loose chain. So a good rule of thumb, literally, is that the top of your thumb and the middle crack that separates your thumb, where you bend, is usually about 1 inch long. Actually about 1 inch and 1/4, which surprisingly is exactly what this is calling for. So 1 1/4 of an inch is the same as 30 millimeters. So I can use my thumb literally as my measuring guide, or this, whatever you want to do. So if I take this chain, this is its resting rate right here. Take my thumb and use this chain. I'm going to measure the top half of this chain. It's right at that mark. It's almost exactly 1 1/4 inches. So once I have at least that, we have to do one further step, and this step is crucial, okay? Because chains, what can happen is they can develop a tight spot. A tight spot in the chain is exactly what it sounds like, a literal tight spot in the chain. And you would find that by spinning the rear wheel freely, in neutral obviously, and seeing when you spin when you rotate the tire, does the chain seem to tighten up in any kind of section? So I'm going to spin this. Right there it seems to get a little bit stiffer. But right there, it gets even stiffer. Looks like right here is my tight spot. Well, let's keep spinning. Sometimes there's 2 on very cheap chains that you guys buy from Amazon and eBay. I'm gonna say that my tight spot is right here, okay? And a tight spot in a chain is common, okay? I'm not saying that your chain is toast once you have that tight spot. It's a common thing. You want to avoid that, obviously. Chains are not supposed to have tight spots, but it happens, okay? Just because of the way the chain works, how you accelerate, a bunch of different factors come into play, especially as far as getting that chain to be perfectly in line with the other sprocket. So if your adjustment here is slightly different from over there, what happens is instead of the chain sitting like this, it's now sitting kind of like this on the sprocket. And when you go to torque that chain, that's where it can get that uneven wear on the roller side, which can cause a tight spot in a chain, okay? Of course, there's a lot more that goes into it. I wish I had a degree in mechanical engineering, but I do not. That's the best way that I can tell you guys. Regardless, you need to adjust the chain from that tight spot, okay? If you think about it, if this is my tight spot here, as this chain goes around, and it's super loose over here, this chain is gonna tighten up once it goes around the sprocket, and then now that chain becomes even tighter, okay? So as it releases, it will get looser, and so on and so forth. So when that chain goes around and it's tight, it's wearing on that sprocket because it's so much tighter than what it should be when you got all this slop in the back, okay? If you have a chain that has an incredible tight spot in it and the rest of it is loose, that's a sign of a worn chain. So is you needing to be all the way at the end of your adjustment, unless somebody installed your chain like an idiot and put too many links in the chain. Different story. So the main goal is to make sure that your adjustments are both the same on both sides. So what you do over here, you do on this other side. And it's very, very small increments is what will make the difference. Okay, so right now, I actually think we are squared up, man. This chain's a little bit stiffer because of all the grease this guy's got on it, but I'm actually pretty satisfied. That tight spot is I'm still satisfied with that tight spot. And actually, the more I work this chain, the more it frees up. It's just because of all that grease that it's like a cold chain with this grease that's on it. So once you've determined that you are in your right free play, usually you measure it from the bottom of the chain. On some bikes, you can measure it from the top. So once I have achieved the free play needed, I can go ahead and then tighten the axle. Now, one thing that you need to realize when you go to tighten your chain back up, obviously, is the torque spec and the right socket. For this one, it is 89 Newton meters. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and tighten this axle up, and I wanna show you guys something. Hopefully it will happen. And just so you guys know, you always wanna tighten from the nut side of a bolt. Okay, don't try to tighten the axle, tighten the nut that's on it. I try to pull this towards me. Hey! There we go. And not up too much, because I would hate for the whole rear end of the bike to come up off the stand, is to recheck the chain tension, okay? Because what can happen is, when you tighten that axle, it kind of scoots the rear tire kind of like that. Because as you're tightening the bolt righty-tighty, it kind of dives itself into that tightness, and it can make your chain tighter. So make sure that you do double check afterwards to make sure that the free play is still there. This one is still there. I like it a lot. On some other ones, this one's fairly simple because the bolt literally threads into the swing arm. On some of them, it doesn't. All it is an arm that's just resting up against that axle. Okay, on those, it can be a little bit tricky because it's almost like you're fighting it back and forth all the time. Once you get it all straight, when you go to tighten your axle, try pulling the chain up against the swing arm and holding it there, okay? That kind of keeps tension on that rear wheel. So when you're tightening the axle, blip, 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 then go back and check it. It might stray away from you guys trying to fight your chain back and forth when it's on the center stand or whatever you got it on. Now, when it comes to lubing your chain, I recommend not running the bike and doing it. I've even been known to do that, but it's still sketchy, man, because I've seen gruesome images of people's hands getting caught in sprockets. Best thing to do is just to put it in neutral. Don't start the bike up, just do it manually. So this is really fundamental, guys. When you go to lube your chain, I like to have a rag handy, okay, so I can guard the back of the chain like this from getting any of the slick on the tire. For those of you guys who like to know what I use, this is my favorite stuff, Bel-Ray Blue Tack Chain Lube. This stuff sticks very, very well to the chain, and it's hard to get off your hands even with gasoline. I mean, it's really, really sticky stuff, and this is just what I prefer to use over Honda stuff all day long. So I'll just start right at a place in the chain where I can grab. I'm trying to get it right on top of that back layer of the O-rings, and then I'll go ahead and hit this front row, and then I would just continue to do that all the way around. And then for my last step, since we got the underbelly or the top of the chain here, I will even go back here and just hit up these O-rings on this exterior. Okay, I'm not overdoing it. Just as I'm spinning the tire, I'm just lubing that one side, and then I'll go to the other side and do the exact same thing. Once I'm done, and because all I really want is the chain grease in the internals of the chain, I'll just take my rag and just make sure that no drippings are going to come off, and the customer thinks it's leaking oil, but really it's not. And I let it set for about 5, maybe 10 minutes. Okay, that allows it to kind of dry on there. So I'm not just lubing it, getting the bike down, and then going for a ride at 100 miles an hour, and then stuff's flinging all over the place. I let it just settle for a minute, just so we can coat everything that I sprayed and dry. I don't want it to fling all over the place. And that's really it, guys. Key things: making sure that you have the right tools, making sure that you're safe when you're doing it, obviously. Make sure that you know your specs about your bike in particular. Chains do not stretch, they wear. Take that home, tweet it, do whatever you want to do with it. As that chain wears, it gets longer. That's why you need your adjustment. Staying on top of that adjustment, staying on top of that lube is what makes that chain and sprocket setup last so much longer. Now, when should you check your chain? Great question. I like to check my chain around every 400 to 500 miles. Sometimes even sooner than that. While you're pumping gas, let's say, hey man, I haven't checked my chain in a while. All you gotta do is reach down there, 2 fingers, and just pull up on the chain. You pull up on that chain, say, hey man, that's really, really sloppy. About 1 inch to 1.5 inches on certain bikes. Know your spec in your brain, or keep a little mini ruler underneath your seat. But just check that chain, make sure and say, hey, that's a little bit sloppy, or hey, that's really, really tight. And if you have anything on your fingers, okay, if you reach down there and it's dry and you're rubbing the chain and it's completely dry, obviously it would be time to lube it. If you reach down there and it's nice and wet, you're good to go, okay? The other key thing, if you're gonna replace the chain, replace the sprockets as well. Very, very rarely have I ever just replaced the chain. Sometimes I have. People couldn't afford it. I advise them, hey, as soon as you get some more money, we're going to need to replace this chain on top of those sprockets, whatever the case may be. If it's too sketchy, then I won't even do it. I say, hey man, either I'm going to do it the right way or nothing at all. Some of the chains that Honda uses are the RK chains as well as the DID. Great chain setups. I would never recommend doing an aluminum sprocket on your street bike. I think they're a waste of money and they wear out super fast. I mean, if you're that concerned about weight on your bike and getting a lighter sprocket, you can probably lose more weight and get a better result. Just think about that. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video on chain and sprockets. I hope you got some kind of bits of information that you can chew on. Be sure to like this video, comment below with what you guys thought about it, and grab your free gift on your way out. As always, Cody from Motorcycle MD, giving you guys quality tips and tricks for your next build or your daily rider. See you guys next time.